Thank you very much, Gali. I was about to say good morning, but it's good afternoon. And happy Father's Day to our fathers as I come and share with you. And I recall one father's experience that I had. I went to the sports day of my first son when he was attending a school called Emmanuel Christian Academy. He might have been about 6 or 7 at the time, and he just happened to be the smallest boy in his class. He was small for his age. He had the heart of a lion, and he wanted to compete in everything. But we know at that age, because he's so small on sports day, he's not going to win anything. That's just how it is, but I can't tell him that. Anyway, he was in the what they call 4x100 meters shuttle relay. Maybe it's about a 4x25 meters shuttle relay. And he was running the anchor leg. And his team was way out in front. Okay? So you know, so me as a very anxious daddy, my glad bag of a boss because Jonathan is going to win. And just as the third leg runner was about to touch Jonathan was in greenhouse, okay? The red house guy who was behind him was maybe about 10 meters behind him, decided not to complete that leg, and he turned around in the middle of the race, turned around and ran to the end and finished the race before my son. Now, of course, the entire greenhouse contingent went up in protest because greenhouse win. But guess what? The judge was on his phone and did not see the infraction. Okay? And all the parents, when you go to the school events, the parents are the most vocal kind of people. All the parents, in particular the mothers, and me in the midst of them, we are protest. We want justice. And the judge stands up there. He doesn't know, the principal comes over. She doesn't know what to do. And then he says, "Miss, I really was on my phone. I didn't see it." He admitted that he didn't see it. We want the gold medal. We are anxious for the gold medal. And the principal says, but nobody saw the infraction. No official saw the infraction. So I cannot change the result. Which in hindsight is fair. Okay? Even though all the parents saw, and the Red House parents were noticeably quiet, I must tell you, we were aghast. We were just about to explode in this Emmanuel Christian Academy. When I heard, "Daddy, Daddy," and I looked behind me, I saw Jonathan running to me. I get a medal. What do I do at that point in time? There's nothing that I can do but just walk away from the protest and hug my son and say, "Congrats, my son. You have done well. You have done well." Okay? Now, I want to tell you that this morning, it's the same kind of attitude that Paul writes this letter to the people who were his children. People whom he knew personally and had this relationship with them that can only be described as the closest relationship between a father and his children. The Philippians had received this letter from him who they knew and loved, and the church was started in Philippi by Paul. How many of us remember that from Acts 16? When Paul went into Philippi, his first step into Europe, there he met, there was no synagogue for him to go and preach in, which was his usual practice. And so what he did, he went to the riverside where the practice was that if there was no synagogue, the few Jews who were there, you had to have up up at least 10 Jewish men. And there were not 10 Jewish men, then those who were there would meet by the river, meet me by the river, and they'd have a time of prayer. And Paul went on there and found that there was this small group led by a woman called Lydia, a seller of purple. And there he ministered the gospel, and she got saved, the first convert in Europe. She was a woman of means, and she invited Paul and Silas and their team to stay at her house. However, as Paul went into Philippi, and as he preached the gospel there, he became annoyed by a slave girl who was constantly walking behind him and prophesying, "These men are men of God who have come to tell you a way of salvation." A way. The Greek text shows us that that's what she's telling them. He is showing you a way of salvation. And Paul turns around one day when he couldn't take it anymore, and he rebukes the spirit, casts the spirit of divination out of her, and she becomes a convert in the church at Philippi. Because of that, Paul is imprisoned, and Silas. They are beaten by some official called lictors, with a very funny name, lictors, who give them some licks with some metal batons. And they are put in prison, put in jail, without a trial, put there. And overnight, at midnight, when Paul and Silas are there singing their praises to God, there's an earthquake, and the Philippian jailer believes that the people have escaped. And so he's going to do the honorable thing of killing himself. Because in that day and age, if prisoners escaped, it would have been bad for him and for his family. And Paul called out to him, "Nobody no gone, my youth. We all here." And the jailer and his family become the next converts in that little church at Philippi. It was not a wealthy church, but it was a loving church. We learn where Paul says later on that though they didn't have much, they gave out of their need to ensure that he was okay. And because of that, Paul said, "I am confident that my God will supply all your needs according to his riches in glory." Point I'm making with all of that background is that this was a church that was birthed out of a shared experience with Paul. He was their father. And as he writes this letter to them, he's once again in prison. And what is so strange about this letter is the attitude with which Paul writes. Because it's not as though he is in prison and he is finding himself in such a dire situation that he can't cope. Look at what he says throughout the book, Philippians 1:15-19. He's not dismayed that there are some people who are preaching the gospel to heap abuse upon him. He says, "No, man, I'm going to be joyful because the gospel is preached anyway." Philippians 2:17-18. Even if I am being poured out like a drink offering, I am glad and rejoice with all of you. So you too should be glad and rejoice with me. Philippians 3:1, he says, "Finally, my brothers," as was read by our sister, "rejoice in the Lord. It is no trouble for me to write the same thing to you again, and it is a safeguard for you. Rejoice in the Lord." And then in chapter 4, verse 4, he now commands it. He says, "Rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I say, rejoice." It is so easy for us to get sidetracked from what Paul's view on what is most urgent is. And for him, it is this thing of being called a partner in the gospel along with God's people. And as far as he's concerned, as long as that gospel message is going out through him, As long as he's doing his part and getting the gospel message out, there is nothing else that's going to distract him. He is going to be happy. So I have this morning, as I come to speak to you, this Father's Day, sharing Paul's fatherly message to the church in Philippi. I wonder, do we feel the very same way about our partnership with the gospel as Paul did? Do we understand it has been the most urgent and joyful task as Paul did? I'm wondering, is it that we ourselves, that we have not focused on the right things, and so we miss it? Can we truly say that this is our attitude as we go through life? Today, I want to challenge you as we continue. Okay? The title of my sermons is Eyes on Jesus. Eyes on Jesus. The challenge is to keep our focus on Jesus, that we can joyfully partner with him in the gospel. Keep our focus on Jesus, that we can joyfully partner with him in the gospel. And my sermon will be built around three main points. Pride binds, perspective balances, and pursuit beholds. Pride binds, perspective balances, and pursuit beholds. Let's go to the first point. Pride blinds, verses 1 to 7. When you read this, it is a little bit strange to see how Paul begins this chapter. Okay? Because he is going to tell them about something that can distract them from the gospel message, something that can distract them from their task. And when you think of that and our experience today, maybe there are some things that come to our mind. We get distracted from preparing for an exam. Not true? We start to watch TV or want to go out with a friend and we get distracted by that. Or we get distracted, from preparing for a football game in the World Cup season now. Someone, I know Gali had at one time a good football team. I don't know if you still have a good football team. Yes? If you say so yourself. Okay? When I was at Eden, we used to love beat up Gali, but but you have a big football match, and say, if you don't get enough rest before the game, you're going to be distracted, you can't do well. You're tired and so on. And we think about those things. The elders tell young people in this life, don't get distracted by boys or girls, the opposite sex. Them lead you astray. Or you allow yourself to be led astray. And all those things are true. But that's not what Paul focuses on at first when he's telling his children that they are to be careful that they are not blinded. What he does is that he focuses on things that we think would be good. What does he say? What he does is that he starts to talk about his own credentials. And he names 6 or 7 things, depending on how you count them. Okay? He says, I'm circumcised on the 8th day. In saying this, he is saying, I'm better than Moses. Because Moses never followed through with the circumcision that was commanded to Abraham, and he almost died for it. My parents ensured that I was circumcised on the 8th day. I am of the people of Israel. He was an Israelite, one of God's chosen people. I'm of the tribe of Benjamin, not just an Israelite, but there were 2 tribes who remained faithful to God throughout. Well, that is debatable as to whether or not they were faithful. But in the Old Testament, 10 northern tribes went astray. The 2 southern tribes, Judah and Benjamin, remained. And he was one from one of those 2 tribes. Because of that, he could say, I'm a Hebrew of Hebrews. As my mother would say, I'm not no pian Hebrew. I'm a good Hebrew. He goes on. He says, in regard to the law, a Pharisee. And what we have come to believe of the Pharisees because of the interaction in the gospel we see with Jesus is that Jesus kind of showed the bad side of the Pharisees. Okay? Their self-righteousness and so on. But in that day, the day of Jesus, the Pharisees were highly esteemed. You know why? Because they were the ones who kept the law. They were the ones who, unlike the Sadducees only read the first 5 books of the Old Testament. And then they never care about the rest of it. They never believed in angels, they never believed in the supernatural, didn't believe in the resurrection, none of those things. The Pharisees were good Orthodox believers, good brethren. He was a Pharisee. As for zeal, he says, persecuting the church. Think about that. You know, when you see in the Acts of the Apostles, you read chapter 6, chapter 7, and chapter 8, you see that their zeal went to the extent that they were even willing to step on the outside of the Roman law in order to keep the Jewish law. And this is what they did, what Paul did when Stephen was stoned. That's how committed he was, that he risked being charged on the Roman law to keep the Jewish law going. He was zealous. As for righteousness, he says, based on the law, I was faultless. You couldn't fault him for skimping on what God required of him. He was so well known in Pharisaical circles that he says in Galatians 1:14 that he was advancing in Judaism beyond many of his contemporaries. And this made him respected and feared in Pharisaic society. He was a student of Gamaliel, the most famous preacher of his day, teacher of his day. But please, don't miss it. Paul has not listed his credentials that he can praise himself for them. These are not a mark of his standing with God. He's going to go on to show you that there is a different type of righteousness that is required. One that is not based or dependent on the external factors that he just listed. Okay? And we're going to go and talk about that shortly. But let's just say that Paul is dismissing these qualities as making him qualified to be involved in the gospel business. In verse 7 he says, but whatever were gains to me, I now consider loss for the sake of Christ. What does he mean by that? Let's look what he is obviously saying. He says, for the sake of Christ. Okay? Whatever he means by that, he obviously means that his accolades did not match up for what was for Christ's sake. But even more than that is this. If he wasn't careful, those accolades could blind him from what was required for the sake of Christ. They could easily become a distraction from what is real and more important. And that's how Paul begins this chapter. In telling the Philippians to rejoice, he quickly warned them that they should beware of those who boasted on their external righteousness. Mutilators of the flesh, he called them. And they placed their confidence in the stripes that they wore on their shoulders, so to speak, in terms of being able to boast about their spiritual credentials. They boast about circumcision. And though Paul doesn't mention it, you can hear them boasting about their Sabbath keeping. You can hear them boasting about the foods that they ate and those that they didn't eat. You can hear them in the very parable of Jesus in Luke 18 when he tells about the Pharisee and the publican. Okay? They were the ones who left the temple feeling self-justified. But they didn't have the justification that comes from God which only comes when people understand their need for God's abundant mercy and grace, like the publican. I think it's obvious how this applies to us now, friends, because I think Paul is talking about some of today's Christians. They pride themselves on their titles. I've met some people who you must call them Dr. such and such because they are titled. They are Dr. such and such. And there are many more preachers who are getting all kind of fancy accolades attached to their names. Apostle, super apostle, prophet of our times. The next time you call me, put all of them beside my name. Okay? But apart from those, because it's very easy for us to point fingers on them and not realize, there are some of us who pride ourselves on the fact that we come to every Bible study. We are not like the others now. We are good Christians. When you have Bible study Wednesday night, we come every Wednesday night Bible study. And we don't do the Zoom thing like, oh no. No. Because we know when you do the Zoom thing, you turn on the Zoom and you go in the bathroom, and you turn on the Zoom and you watch a YouTube video, and you do all kinds of... We not stay so. We come and we sit down in front of God and the people of God, and we take in the word. We are better than you. Okay? I read something that says, I don't know how they measure it, don't ask me. Barna in the USA, who does a lot of Christian polls, says the most self-righteous people attend Wednesday night meetings at church. No, it didn't say that all Wednesday night people are self-righteous. It didn't say that. Okay, so don't get me wrong. But somehow there is this self-credentialing that we like to speak about when we do the things that are required. Sisters cover their heads and they come to church. Brothers wear jacket and tie when they come to church. I'm happy to see that some of those things are disappearing. But I am telling you that Paul is speaking to some Christians today. Maybe some of them are here. I do not know. Sadly, they do not recognize this, or they probably refuse to recognize it. That these things, as important as they are, and they are important, that they do not help us in our standing with Christ. In fact, if we start believing that they in some way make us more worthy of God's grace, Paul says we have fallen from grace. He says that in Galatians 5, verse 4. Having begun by grace, are you now going to go on and attain your righteousness by works? You have fallen from grace. If you do so, you have allowed your pride to blind you, and you will miss the grace of Jesus. So I want to conclude by summing up what Paul is saying by this point. Conclude this point, that is. No pride, no distraction, just Jesus. No pride, no distraction, just Jesus. I want to promise you that my next 2 points are not going to be as long. All right? So you can put up with me and give me a little Father's Day blessing that I can continue and not beat me up too much. Second point, perspective balances, verses 8 to 11. Paul's second point in many ways is just a continuation of the first point. But I need to separate it because of some important factors here. Okay? He wants the Philippian Christians not to be blinded by the good things. I mentioned the good things that they can say about themselves in terms of their value in improving their standing with Christ. He now wants to explain the point more clearly. And this is what he says. He says that knowing Christ is more important than racking up the spiritual accolades that so easily come with our faithfulness to the Lord. When we become faithful to the God Lord, now friends, trust me, we start to earn a lot of spiritual accolades. Rightly so. But if we don't make sure, those accolades start to mislead us. Paul here says that they are not as important as knowing Jesus. And by that, he's speaking about something experiential, something that comes from a relationship with Jesus. No amount of how often you come to Bible study, or how long you pray, or how many times you read the Bible, or how much offering you give, none of that necessarily translates into knowing Jesus. Understand that? And he's saying, what is most important is knowing Jesus. And because of that, he says he counts these spiritual accolades as a loss. As a loss. They so easily distract us that what I'm going to do, the new perspective I'm going to hold, is that them not really mean nothing. I'm not talk about them. But guess what? They are not just a disadvantage. They are not just a liability. Paul uses some strong language to describe these accolades. Okay? I'm going to tell you the Greek word because, and I'll tell you why I tell you the Greek word. Greek word is skubalon. He says they are skubalon. And I'm sorry for quoting the Greek. I don't like quoting Greek in my sermons. But bear me out here. There is no polite way of saying what Paul counts them as. The word that he uses here is the only time it's used in the New Testament. And the translators have had a hard time of writing what they want to write, because if they write it, you won't read the Bible. And so what they do is that they use euphemisms, nice ways of saying what Paul actually said. So some of them say they count it as garbage or as refuse. One translation says he counts them as dung. That is closest to the word that Paul uses. But I know you know what I'm talking about, right? You don't even want to think about it. It's a very messy word. But anyway, that's what he uses. He uses it to shock the people. His children in the Lord. He wants them to know that you can be easily misled by things that is not worth more than dung. I consider them garbage, dung, that I may gain Christ and be found in him, not having a righteousness of my own that comes from the law, but that which is through faith in Christ. The righteousness that comes from God on the basis of faith. He sets those things aside because they mislead and they don't amount to anything. Instead, he's doing everything to know Christ. I must confess that doing this, as Paul says, is not as easy. It is a lot trickier than we think. I want to explain. Follow me here a little bit. Some of you can relate to this personally. A brother is going through some horrendous time in life, and he feels like he's going to fall away at any moment. Okay, Daniel, I pick up that you're going through some difficult times now, your daughter. Is that so? Is that you? Yes. Yeah. Okay. And the brother, not necessarily Daniel, feels like he's going to fall away at any moment. How can I continue? None of us want to experience what Job experienced. Nobody here pray, Lord, test me like Job. Anybody here pray like that? Test me like Job? No, sir. No. We don't want that. But some of us get it. There is a saying in Trinidad and Tobago. I lived in Trinidad and Tobago for 3 years. Them say, sometimes you catch hell. And that is a very vivid picture of what seems to attach to your life. All kinds of difficulties. So this brother is going through all these difficulties. He feels like falling away. But instead of falling away, what he does, that he picks up himself, and he goes to church, he goes to Bible study. There he's encouraged by the word and by the very supportive saints who know of his struggle. His elders encourage him to get involved in ministering to somebody else who is going through difficulties, that you can take your mind off your own troubles. All kind of good things. And he follows through faithfully, very difficult. He cries many nights that people don't understand, but he goes through and he does this. His devotional life improves. Many of us can attest that when we're catching hell, the Bible means more to us at the time. And we are, devotional life improves, and over the next year and a half, he becomes, by human standards, a better person. He doesn't even realize it. But somehow, the hell that he was catching don't feel as hellish anymore. It's still there, but he has overcome it. And somebody in Galilee Gospel Hall says, "Can you see how Brother Daniel has done well? For the past year and a half, I've gone through all kind of difficulty, and he has stood up like a stalwart of the faith." We are glad to have people like him here. And Brother Daniel goes home, and I'm glad I was using his name, not saying that this is true of him. He goes home and he thinks about it, and he says, "God, I have done well. Thank you." This is what has happened. Instead of seeing the grace and mercy that has kept him going, suddenly he starts to see it as his own doing. And that easily happens to us. Easily happens to us. And what it does is that it blinds our mind from the grace of God and the power of the Holy Spirit that Jesus has given to us to help us walk through our serious struggles. I have been going through some serious struggles for the past year and a half. And I remind myself of that every single day. And I hope I never ever miss it. It's only by the grace of God. Only by the grace of God. I wonder, is there anybody here that feel like that? Only God's grace carry through? Only by the grace of God. Paul's point is that we must remember that perspective balances. Perspective balances. The accolades that we have coming from us doing good, when he says that we must put them behind us, he's not saying we must stop doing good. Do all the good you can to all the people you can for as often as you can. Continue to do it, but don't ever see that goodness that you do as somehow something that makes you a little bit better than somebody else. It's God and His grace that's keeping you going. And that's why it is Paul's greatest desire that he knows Christ. And that's why he's telling his children, know Christ. When you catch hell, the only way you're going to get through is when God help you. Hold on to Him and you'll get through. So what is Paul saying here? Eyes on Jesus every step of the way. I've gone to my third point, and the third point will be even half as long as the other second point. So we'll soon finish. Pursuit beholds, verses 12 to 14. Pursuit behold. What do I mean by that? I'm repeating Paul's idea that the Christian walk, and here he's talking about like a race. The Christian race is one that requires us keeping our eyes on the prize. There's a long distance runner that I know. I know Galilee have some track aficionados who can tell you all about these things and so you know them already, right? So me I know, me can't tell you what people tell me, right? There's this long distance athlete who I know, and he says that when he's running a race, a long race, 1,500 meters, 3,000 meters, 5,000 meters, 10,000 meters, whatever he's running, marathons, whenever he's running them, he keeps his focus on the path before him. He has a long way to go, and he's focused on the path before him. And then when the finishing line comes into view, he shifts his focus to the finish. He is keeping his eyes fixed on the prize, because the race don't done until it's done. You don't win the race because you lead halfway. You don't win the 100 meters because you lead for 99 meters. Kishane Thompson can tell you that. Not true? At that time, my friend says, he focuses on the line because he is going to strain. His body is telling him now, a time for you to stop now. You know, David here can tell you about lactic acid and all them, something they build up in him. And everything is telling him, stop now, stop now. And he knows in his mind, I can't stop because the finish don't happen yet. And so he strains and he pushes himself until he gets there. And this is exactly what Paul is saying. But let's not misunderstand him. You know why? A misunderstanding is very easy. Paul has just spoken about the fact that his spiritual accolades don't matter. So is he now saying that we must work and do our best that we can achieve the end? Surely he's not saying, that somehow, even though I tell you, say, it's not anything you can do that will make you get it. You must do something to get it now. Elsewhere in this book, in Philippians 1, he says, he who began a good work in you is faithful to complete it. Okay? God has already completed Paul's salvation, and might I say, he has already completed ours. And that has come through Jesus. But this is not the goal that Paul is speaking of here, or at least not in a simplistic way. He says, I press on to take hold of that for which Christ took hold of me. What is he talking about? He's talking about his purpose, the purpose for his calling in Christ. The full experience of his union with Jesus, shaped by the resurrection life and shaped by Jesus' resurrection life, was summed up in Paul's mission. The one who was persecuting the church, the one who was righteous, self-righteous to the nth degree, had to be struck down that he could find the grace of God, that he could understand the message and carry it to the Gentiles. Of course, Paul's mission will end with heaven. But here he's talking about pressing on towards the goal to which Christ has called him, fulfilling his purpose. He was called to be an apostle to the Gentiles. And as long as he had life left, as long as he was able to continue, his calling was not complete. So how did he approach achieving this task? Two things. We said them already. He forgot what was behind, and he pressed towards the finish. He focused on the finishing line and strained every muscle and sinew to get there, because this is what Christ called him to. I kind of wondered, and I asked a question at first. I wonder if we understand why God has called us to be partners in his gospel. I wonder if we understand that. And I wonder if we count it joy to be involved in that gospel. It's questions that we have to answer ourselves. Somehow, I see in my own life where I'm so caught up with all kinds of other things that are happening that I miss the joy of being partner with Jesus in the gospel. What about you? What about you? The writer to the Hebrews says, let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured such opposition from sinners, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. Paul says, run for the prize, eyes on Jesus. So I end. I want to remind you that pride blinds. Let us set aside those things that can pull us down. Perspective balances. Let us understand that they are garbage in compared to the task of knowing Christ. Pursuit beholds. On this road, on this race of running for Jesus, our pursuit constantly keeps our eyes on Jesus. We want to be the people who finish our race well. We have to do that. I want to close by asking about those of you here who might not be believers yet. You have heard the call to focus on Jesus. What about you? Do you know that God wants you to come and depend on him? Do you know that when you depend on God, he wants to use you to achieve great things? It's the only way you'll be able to break free from your past and live the future he desires for you. I challenge you, Christian and non-Christian, to take up Jesus' burdens. He says, and I close with this, my yoke is light and my burden is easy. Amen.
Everyone just say the truth.